It's Sunday, February 7th, 2016, and this is the Product Mentor Talk. Today we're joined by one of our mentors, Bennett Morrison, Head of Product at Security Scorecard. He's going to lead a talk today on measuring product and development. So those of you joining us perhaps for the first time today, let me just briefly explain the format. Those of you people you see on the bottom of your screen, and some others that might be joining us a little bit later, are mentors and mentees within the Product Mentor program. They get paired up one-on-one for a period of 6 months to really help people upgrade their product management skills. So first of all, let me just quickly go around the room, the tiny room today, with some introductions. Let me first start with Lonnie. Remember to mention a little bit about yourself and mentor and mentee. Lonnie?
So my name is Lonnie Rosenbaum. I'm a mentee in this program, and I'm a product manager working in New York City at a company called Booker.
Excellent. And then to Bennett.
Hi, I'm Bennett Morrison, and as Jeremy said, I am the head of product at a company called Security Scorecard here in New York City.
Excellent. And so for those of you who are joining us, if you go to theproductmentor.com/live, you can always post your questions as this is a live stream, and I'll pass the questions along to Bennett in a fairly near real-time fashion. The more generic questions I'll save to the end of the talk, like what is product management, we'll save that for the end. But as long as it's topically relevant, we'll get it to them right away, or pretty close to that. And I am Jeremy Horn, a.k.a. the Product Guy, and I'll be moderating here today. And with all that said, let me hand it to you, Bennett, to kick it off.
Sure. Thanks, Jeremy. Okay. So this afternoon, or depending on where you are, morning or evening's talk is about measuring development and measuring product. I actually inverted the ideas of product and development because of how I wanted to tackle them. So what are we going to talk about today? And realistically, I wanted to kind of give this a really high-level view, starting with principles of measuring people, because really, when we're talking about metrics, we're really talking about measuring people, whether it's measuring internal metrics like measuring development or external measurements like measuring product. And specifically, when you're thinking about measuring product, probably what you're measuring is customers' engagement, how customers are reacting or using a product, and things along those lines. This really isn't about things like measuring uptime or some of the more nitty-gritty metrics of, say, that you might do with something like a New Relic, where you're really kind of looking at how your systems are behaving. So realistically, those are the three areas I'm going to start with. And so, like every good talk about measurement and management and principles, you have to start out with your quote. So the gentleman on the left is Peter Drucker. Peter Drucker is a management guru from, say, the early 80s and 70s, incredibly well-regarded, some really great books. I would recommend anyone to check him out. And one of the things he's often quoted as saying is, if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. And I have seen probably about a half a dozen presentations on measurement start with this quote. So yes, this is the obligatory management guru quote. This quote is supposed to be, kind of ground the presentation. And there's a kernel of truth to what that quote is saying, right? If you want to measure something, or excuse me, if you want to manage something, if you really want to kind of say put it under control, get better at it, you're going to have some measure to compare it against. The problem with that quote, though, as I started digging into this, is that this management guru never said it. He had a much more nuanced view of measurement. And so the reason I even put this in the presentation is because this presentation is really about trying to get a nuanced view of measurement and trying to understand the implications of what it is you're measuring and how they can be used or misused. So the reason I know he never said it is because it was brought up in you can see the source there on the bottom of the slide, the Drucker Institute, which is the nonprofit that works on his, works on the items that he does and kind of is like in charge of his legacy. They have all of his papers. They went and looked for this quote and they could never find it. And they put that together in an article that they called Measurement Myopia. And of course, myopia means kind of just focusing on too narrow of an item and thinking that that's going to solve everything. And that essentially is a theme of what a lot of measurement is about. So rather than reference that quote, I'm going to look at another source kind of to start off. And it's this book called Measuring and Managing Performance in Organizations. This book came out a while ago. It's by Rob Austin. It's actually from his PhD dissertation before he went to go teach at Harvard Business School. And there's a lot in this book, but if I distill it down to the 2 bullet points on the left, it has to do with the behavioral consequences of measures. And this is meaning the behavioral consequences that measurement has on people. And so what does that mean? And then, well, I'll also do the second bullet. It's incomplete measures create dysfunctional results. And so those 2 items might seem simplistic, but let me unpack them a bit, right? So the behavioral consequences of measures. So let's say you are, and then the incomplete measures. So let's say you're a product manager, and let's say you are given, say, a goal, and your goal is to produce X number of features per quarter. And chances are, based on what that goal is, is going to based on, say, the quality of your features, or say the quality of whatever it is you're building. And so if the measure is wrong, or if the measure, say, is like 20 features, you're probably going to have a lot of minor, insignificant features that don't really have the gestalt or what you're looking for in your product. They are, and you're probably going to wind up having a lot of bad features. This is really about, so that's really an incomplete measure, right? That is not really what you should be going for. But time and time again, I see this happening. So when I first encountered this book, I actually helped Rob on this book when I was still an undergrad. And I remember reading these 2 items and thinking, wow, this just seems, of course this makes sense. If you say, give someone a job and say only reward them based on 1 item of their job, they're only going to do that 1 item. And if there are other things that need to get done, chances are they're going to get neglected. And of course, when I was younger and I saw this, I'm thinking in my naive state, of course this is true. Everyone knows this. But then the more and more I kind of go through different positions, I see this happening again and again. The incomplete measures are creating dysfunctional results. So we really have to kind of think about what makes them incomplete, and then the behavioral consequences. So what behavior are they driving? So when I kind of step back and unpack really what it is we're looking for, what we're really looking for is a set of measures that produce desired business goals. And this is true about whether we're managing development or whether we're managing product. So to kind of take a step back and look at this, a set of measures means obviously that it's going to be more than one, and I differ with various people on this. Some people think you need to focus on 1 measure at a time. I don't know that that's realistic in my experience. I think you probably have to have a set of measures, but at the same time it has to be not a set of, say, 10 or 12 measures, but really try to hone it down to around 3, 4, 5 measures that you're really going to be looking at. And the second part about this is that it has to produce desired business goals. And of course, that might seem simplistic and kind of self-explanatory, but too often measures get removed from business goals, or it's a little bit unclear of what business goals they're supposed to be tied to. And of course, the fewer business goals, or the more focused the business goals, the more focused the measures are going to be, the more likely of success. So before we start, thinking about it, like these are the principles this is the principle portion, this is what we're trying to lay down. And so before we start to think about what measures we're going to use, we have to start thinking about the business goals. Really, what are the business goals we're trying to drive? So then you have questions to agree on. So what's the business goal we are trying to achieve? And I put a whole mess of things that I have heard in various times, in this blob below that. But you're looking at things like growth, revenue, retention, active users, stickiness, customer satisfaction, leads, sales effectiveness, profits. Any of those items, a viral word of mouth, how many mentions are we getting? How many likes are we getting? Feature adoption, are they really using the features we're putting out there? All of these business goals are great business goals. They are all things that everyone is trying to achieve in their business, but there is a need to focus on which one is more important for where you are with your product, with your business at different points in time. And so as a product owner, you probably have influence in the business, or if you're a product manager or a product owner, you definitely you represent the business, so you have to be aligned with where the business is and where it needs to go. So if there is another business owner, so in my case it's my CEO, COO, I have to be aligned with them on what it is that we need to accomplish from a business standpoint every single quarter. Part of my job as well is to kind of push that need to focus. So the challenge with a list of or a blob of metrics like these or goals like these is that you want to achieve all of them. Nothing here really do you ever want to like say, we don't need to be viral and we really don't need active users. No, you want all of that. But the point that you're going to have to make, or the kind of stand you're going to have is one of these things needs to be more important than others. And again, this might be justified based on the stage of your business. It might be justified based on whatever your quarterly or yearly goals are for the business, but that's what's going to start dictating how your measures are going to move. This question that I have below, is it a cluster of goals or a sequence? Again, the idea of, is this that really that we need to kind of tease out each one of these business goals and say, is growth and revenue really the same, and can we just combine it and say that it's X, and put it with sales effectiveness and say that we are, essentially maximizing for time to value, and that's really what we're going to agree is our business goal, and because it covers growth, it covers revenue, it covers sales effectiveness, and if we have time to value, maybe active users and retention and stickiness will all just follow, and therefore customer satisfaction. Again, it's a way to kind of how are you organizing these different business goals so that you can tell a story that doesn't look like a blob or just like a dashboard, but that actually kind of tells a bit of a narrative of what it is you're trying to achieve. And all of that happens with focus. So I'm going to go right now into measuring development and talk a little bit about that. So when I think about measuring development, we just talked about business goals. One of the things that always comes up is like, well, if you're measuring development, you're measuring what you're going to build. The most important thing is business value. You're delivering value to the customer. So if you've ever done, say, Scrum training or Agile training, you get these nice little cards that are given to you, and they all have like little number, say business value 100, business value 200, and it's so easy to kind of do that when you're kind of in Scrum training. And then, of course, you go and you become a product manager, you become a product owner, and then you realize, wow, it's, finding that number is actually one of the hardest things. So, this is great, it delivers value to customers, but how are you figuring out what business value is? How are you really kind of unpacking it? It's a soft metrics, which is why it's in quotation marks. Only in very rare cases can you actually tie something like revenue or profitability to business, to a business value. So really, until you kind of unpack it, until it's out in the wild, until you've kind of seen how it's reacting, it's a hypothesis. And then you also have to wonder, because it's a hypothesis, it might fail. So what if it doesn't work? How are you going to get that business value better? So again, I think to make a point about business value is essential. You want to have it. You want to kind of be pushing for it. But over time, it's going to need to get better, and you're going to have to get better at refining it. Defects, right? So everyone hates defects in the products they sell. So great, we're going to focus on defects, and we're going to say that we're going to deliver defect-free products. And so I've worked at places where, various divisions of other products have started this mantra, but the problem there is that it slows development of new features, and I put this there twice. It can really slow development of new features because that's what happens. This goes back to that point of how measurements can have dysfunctional results on organizations. If the focus becomes too heavy on defects, nothing new will go out the door. And so you will not have any defects, but you will not have any features. And so that is one of those challenges with kind of the way that you need to balance metrics to make sure that you aren't going too far in one direction. And so that group that I was mentioning before at a company that I used to work at that I won't name, they really had a struggle getting new features out the door to the point where it kind of became a running joke on the sales team. And so you definitely don't ever want to be in that situation. So then what about story points, right? So again, I'm going back to, say, Agile or Scrum training, and a lot of that is about how you estimate story points. And story points, for those of you who don't know or who have never gone through Scrum training, they're an estimate of effort. They're an estimate of a way that say, they're supposed to be divorced from time or actual scheduling, but they say, how difficult is it to do what it is we're asking you to do in an incremental fashion? Build a small feature, build a component of a product. And they're really cool, and you can make these cool burn down charts like that one there when you have them, and you can say, hey, look, we are going at this rate, and everything is really great. In my experience, there's a time to adoption for story points, though. I've gone through this several times where you start working with a dev team, and again, the purpose is, in my case, as a product owner, is more to understand when certain features are going to be able to deliver to market. When are we going to be able to be delivering features and values to customers? So I'm using story points to do that, and I'm having the development team kind of go through planning poker and say, well, I'm assigning 8 points to this, or 13 points to that, or 20 points to something else. Well, every time that I've gone through this, there's a moment of adoption. There's a time to adoption, and that time to adoption, really what I'm talking about, is the development team to understand what a 20 points versus 13 points versus 8 points is. It often takes, a few sprints, but it starts to get a little bit better, assuming you kind of keep the sprints uniform and everything kind of stays in the same realm. It's a very tricky item as well, because as a business or as a product owner, you have business constituents and stakeholders wanting more things faster, and they want you to overload sprints, and it's very difficult to kind of push back on that. The story points help. And really what they do is allow you to say, okay, if over, say, 3 sprints, I'm realizing we're probably getting 45 points a sprint, I don't know, arbitrary number. Therefore, I know if I want to get this feature done, it's, say, 90 points worth of work, it's going to take me at least 2 more sprints to do it. And so that's the benefit to you. But again, that time to adoption is very difficult. Second point there, why does my chart doesn't look right? Well, okay, there's a grammar problem there. But realistically, what's going on there, that's an actual chart that I pulled from a project that I used to work on, where, again, so the idea that red line is supposed to follow that gray line, but what winds up happening, again, the first couple of times you do it, is you realize, wait, 2 days in, we forgot a whole bunch of stuff, so we pile in a bunch more points. The red line goes all the way up. People are thinking about what they're going to do. Someone does some work and commits code, and then great, it's in QA. And so maybe that's your definition of done. The line goes down, and then everyone is working on everything else, and then probably doesn't finish anything that very first sprint. So again, we've got these 3 metrics, and really what we're looking at is how these 3 metrics play together. So if we take a step back and think about business goals again. So again, we're looking for the set of metrics that produce the desired business goal. What if we say our business goal is predictable development that delivers valuable and high-quality product? That seems to be a fairly good and solid business goal. It's somewhat succinct. And if we unpack that, we realize that each one of those metrics is trying to drive something off of that. Right? So predictable, well, that's where the story points are going to come into effect. Like, I want to know how much development is coming. Valuable, so I want to make sure that I have some business value to it. Again, there's challenges with the business value metric, but I still want business value to come from it, and I still want to make sure that I'm developing stuff for my customers. So realistically, as a product owner, I'm going to focus on the business value and getting that metric right. The other 2 items are going to be more on the dev side. And story points, and then the other one being high quality, so that's the defect count. And again, you can't just do the defect count, but you have to push it against the story points, the business value. So my points here on the side, what I really want to do with this goal is state the goal as succinctly as possible. Make it a set of measures, because you need all of them. If you go for one versus the other, you're going to have dysfunctional results. And then if I'm stating something in a sentence, the adjectives matter most. Right? So if the development was predictable, it might be story points. If there's a different adjective in there, there might be something else, right? If it's high quality, 0 defect, whatever the adjective is going to be the constraint on how you balance between these goals. All right. So that's when I'm thinking about measuring development. And this is kind of the 3 items that I often look at when I measure development. I'm going to move now to measuring product, which is not a lot trickier, but can become a lot more complex. Because when I start thinking about the business goal for product, am I creating, maintaining, growing? Like, what is the verb that I'm doing for, what type of product? that helps customers do X, Y, and Z so that our company can do A, B, and C, right? And so realistically, I'm trying to fill in something like this. I'm trying to fill in a statement that's going to say, this is what the product does, this is how I know it's helping customers, and so this is how it's going to help our company. But I would pause here to say the more complex the goal, the more complex the statement here, the more complicated the measures, and the less likely there will be a clear success from any single metric. So again, it's a matter of balancing them out and a matter of understanding how they're going to connect to business goals. So I'm going to take a step back and talk about two sources right now about metrics. And so like the first one is the Lean Startup. And again, if you're probably a member of this group, if you're watching this live cast, probably you've read this book. If you haven't read this, I mean, you probably have read this book. If you haven't read this book, you should definitely read this book because it's so pervasive right now in the industry, and it is so pervasive in the prevailing thought of what is going on and what people are talking about. There's two concepts in this book that I wanted to talk about. One is the MVP, the minimally viable product. Essentially, that is that is one of the hallmarks of this book, about talking about this product that you can put out into the wild and you can learn from it and iterate on it and gain all this wonderful insight. But for the purposes of a metrics conversation, when I first read this book when it came out, the thing that stuck most with me were vanity metrics. And so these are metrics that really are not tied to any business goal. The concept of a vanity metric, a great one that he brings up in this book, is page views. Or, I would think of something like how many unique users does a content site get a month? Well, that might be great, in a certain sense, but how engaged are they? How what's the bounce rate? How quickly are they dropping off of a site? Are they really engaged in the site? Are the advertisers getting essentially what they're paying for in a content site? Again, vanity metrics, page views, things like that are something to think of. The minimally viable product, though, has kind of really ingrained itself in a lot of the thinking around product, to the point now where I think it's almost gone too far, and you are starting to see a bit of a backlash on it. And so I just want to talk a little bit about an MVP. So some of the things that I've overheard from the time the book has been released is, can we put together an MVP version? Or we're going to make this MVP, and let's just get an MVP out. So those are all statements I've overheard. And there's this really great article called The Tyranny of the Minimum Viable Product, or I call it minimally. But the idea here is that, right now it's being used almost as an excuse to kind of do bad things, right? Like you're just doing minimum amount of stuff, and it's really not viable anymore. And so again, so we go to take a step back and wonder, well, what is the minimum viable product supposed to achieve? And what it's supposed to achieve is learning. So what that entails, though, is that you have to, when you put it out in the world, learn something from it. And so again, tying back to metrics, tying back to what we want to get to is that set of metrics that produce a desired business goal. Really, the only reason to be putting an MVP out in the world is if you need to learn something. If you already know where your customers live, if you already know what it is that they want, there's really not so much a need for an MVP. And so your metrics should probably reflect that. Your metrics should reflect that. And you should get away from it. Now, if you do need to learn something, and part of product in general is always learning something new about your customers, you are going to have certain items that you're going to learn on and iterate on. The question is, do you really have to call them an MVP version or not? So again, when I start thinking about this, the idea of measurements and metrics, I started with the Lean Startup, and then that point that I was just making about what we've been really bad at is measuring and learning from it since the Lean Startup came out. And that's not really my point. That's a point from another book that I would recommend wholeheartedly. It's called Lean Analytics. And this one's really at the startup level, but the ideas behind it can work for any level of organization. And they have a great presentation there. And one of the things that they talk about metrics for product and just in general is what makes a good metric? And I'm going to walk through each one of these 4 things, and occasionally there's a 5th thing as well. But first one is comparable. So that's comparison is a context, right? Can I compare? Can I take this metric and can I compare, say, cohorts or customers using this metric? Can I compare how each one is? Can I compare it from different points in time? And can I use the same metrics to understand if I'm getting better or worse? Understandable is what you would assume it to be, but you have to be able to kind of point to a metric and have the entire business understand what it means. They have to know if you're getting better, if it's getting worse, and they have to also know just what it is behind that metric and why it's important, right? It's so the problem with vanity metrics, page views, is they sound good, like they sound like people coming, or even uniques. Uniques are great. It's 6 million people coming to our site. Wow, that's understandable. But how many of them are clicking into an article? And then how many of them are reading the article? And what's the, how do we figure that out based on, say, where they scroll or how far they scroll down? Really, again, you have to make that metric understandable. The ratio rate has to do with essentially the only way to measure change and roll up the tension between 2 metrics is a ratio or a rate, right? If you just have an absolute count, it's going to become very, very difficult, right? So the difference, say, is like how many dailies, again, the rate is, sorry, when you have a count, it's going to be very difficult to roll it up. It could just be you scaling, but necessarily things aren't necessarily getting better. Or essentially, if you have just more people going through the funnel, but the rate or the ratio isn't changing, you aren't necessarily getting better. You might have just more people coming in. And the actionable behavioral one is, really the difficult one. And it's what would you do differently based on the results you get, right? So what realistically can you do from a business, from a product owner perspective to say, okay, we really need to change this metric and I believe this will do it. So I would think of those 4 things I think are really important when developing good metrics. When I've gone in to develop my metrics programs, those are 4 that I constantly keep in mind. And I would say, again, you really should check that presentation out. I wanted to steal a lot more from it for this presentation, but I declined. So going into measuring product now. And so I'm going to do this at a fairly high level. I'm not going to go very deep into different things you can do. I think most of us have some kind of analytics background, but if there are any questions on that, please feel free to ping Jeremy. I mean, when I say analytics background, we've all seen analytics packages, and we all know kind of how they work. But, when you think about measuring product, one of the first things that comes up is transactions, and these are okay. And as I kind of put them all here, page views, which I've already kind of talked about, are uniques, or then you have monthly active users, daily active users, really the same metric over a different time. But then again, you do have that rate, right? Page depth, so how far are you going? And then events, really kind of what are you clicking on? So when I think of the transactions, really what I'm looking for when I think about what measurements or what measuring metrics programs I'm going to put in place, I want to make sure that I really am looking for engagement. So I'm really looking for a metric that is going to show how much more someone is engaged. But the challenge with all of the transactional metrics that I always pull back is really what's the quality of the interaction? Is the customer really getting the value from the product that they say they are? So again, when I think of things like Google Analytics, they could give me all of this, but realistically what they can't give me is the quality of the interaction, and that's what I want to also understand from my customers, because I want to make sure that they're getting the value they want from the product. So the next item that I might look at is, say, satisfaction, RTF and NPS, right? So nice TLAs, 3-letter acronyms. RTF is recommend to a friend. NPS is Net Promoter Score. I've used both. I use both still, even though they have limitations that I'll talk about. Usually they're both framed in the same question: how likely are you to recommend this to a friend? RTF can be calculated a variety of different ways. I've seen it calculated. Net Promoter Score has a fairly set way that it's calculated. You take the total number of, how likely are you to recommend this to a friend? Scale is 1 to 10. 9 and 10 are promoters. 7 and 8 are neutrals. Everything below that is a detractor. You take the promoters, you subtract the detractors, and that's your number. Right, and so the great thing about NPS is it can be used across industry. You can use it to bellwether where you are, but I think that there's limitations to both of these, and so one of them is really that one on the right is what action are you going to take? Usually NPS is sent along with a follow-up question, what would make you change your score? Sometimes those responses always need to be sifted through your lens of, say, a customer expert, or say what it is that you want to go as a customer expert. But realistically, it's very difficult to kind of tease out from a small sample of where it is that your product direction should go. What it does help you know is whether or not it's getting better over time. The other item that I put here is support tickets. So sometimes it's just better to kind of look at, say, what it is people are asking about. Where are people clicking on the site and having trouble? And if you have some kind of support mechanism, how can they get back to you? And that moves much more into this next item, which is direct feedback. So how can you get direct feedback in the product that you have out there and have people come back to you and say, yes, I like this, yes, I don't. So this screen grab I just grabbed from Intercom. If you were on one of the talks earlier today, we were Felix was talking about Intercom and how it can be used. He was talking actually how they hire people, but something like Intercom, and there are a couple other products out there where you can poll people as they use the product. How do they like this? They just used a feature. Did it work well? There's a host of these. Some of these are obnoxious. We've all taken the test or the quiz afterwards, saying, can I give you a quiz about how to use the site? You kind of say yes as you're going along, just get rid of this window, and then the window pops up afterwards, and you're like, ugh, I don't want to deal with this. Sometimes those are good, sometimes not. The more direct you can get it, the more inside the transaction you can get it, the better off you're going to be. So I'm going to take a step back right now, and I'm going to say again, what it is that we're trying to do when we're measuring the product. And so realistically, I went through a whole bunch of different metrics there about transaction, satisfaction, direct feedback, but again, it's got to be tied to the business goals. What specific business goals does a metric ladder up to, right? Am I looking for adoption, engagement, or retention? So I just kind of threw those three out there. If I'm looking for adoption, it might just be, depending on what type of product it is, depending on adoption and what type of product it is. So if it's more of a consumer product, how quickly are people signing up? How quickly are people getting through that funnel? How quickly am I getting, that email, and how quickly are they getting into the product? Engagement might mean something like how quickly do they do the first important item that I need them to do. And then retention is, how after 30, 60, 90 days, how quickly are they coming back on a consumer side? If I'm on a business side, and I spend most of my time on enterprise SaaS, adoption really is about knocking down sales boulders, right? So how am I knocking down sales boulders? Like what are, when I say sales boulders, so I have sales reps, they're in with the customer asks, well, what about this, or how about this, or I don't trust that. Realistically, where is the demo falling down for the sales reps so that the customers are getting excited about it? Engagement then is, say, post-sale, how quickly are they getting onboarded? How quickly from the time of, say, they get those first accounts in the door till they have their account, till they're in the account and it's getting set up, and how quickly can I convert them into a monthly user? And then retention in an enterprise sense is literally, are they renewing every year, every 3 years? So that's about tying it to the business goals. Is there a direct causation? So again, it's very hard to say that there's a direct causation, but realistically, you're trying to get as direct as possible and really what it is that you're tying the metric to. Each one of those items that I mentioned, right? So like take sales boulders or something like that, where the sales is just having trouble getting things through. I can kind of say, okay, how many demos did sales give? How many times did this come up? And how many times? And then if I put a feature out there or I make a change to the product, what does that look like over time? Is that coming down? Are people getting more confident? Is our conversion, is our funnel time, is our sales funnel time condensing? And again, I mentioned conversion, but is the conversion rate improving? All of those things are things that I would look to happen if I make that change. And that is as close to a direct causation as you're going to get. So that's the tie to the business goal. The second part is the verifying the hypothesis, and this was the point that I mentioned with the minimum viable product. Realistically, whenever you're putting a feature out there, you're going to have some idea of what success is going to look like, but also, are you taking the time to think about what failure looks like? Are you taking the time to think about when it's time to cut off a feature that's no longer working? Say if we're talking about feature adoption, if no one clicks on the button, if no one pulls down the drop-down menu, if things in the menu are never clicked on, how are you going to deal with that? And if that's failure, do you have an idea for it? And then how are you going to drive to a decision on, say, sunsetting that feature, maybe revamping it? Are you iterating on it? Do you stop iterating on it at failure? Because the fourth point is you really want to stop the tyranny of the MVP. You want to stop this idea that you can throw out bad products and just not iterate on it and not learn from it. Realistically, a failed MVP is something you throw out into the world and you don't measure and you don't learn. And so that would be one of the points that I would want you to take away from this presentation. The other point, and again, I'm coming back to this, is realistically when you're looking at the principles that you want to get out of this, you want to understand a set of measures that produce desired business goals. And so again, a set isn't a dozen. A set is like maybe a half dozen at most of measures that produce the desired business goals. And so that desired business goals is really about you being connected to the business and understanding what it is that your business needs to get done that quarter, that year, and so forth. The last item that I'd mention with measuring product is that we're all very, and I mentioned this before, was I kind of was saying, kind of going very quickly through the analytics section, is that we all know analytics. We all have them. So I took this from the Chief Martech from last year. There's going to be a new one coming out of all of the different analytics and dashboard visualizations that we can all do, pipe them through with APIs or just kind of use these analytics items, and then you can dashboard them, customize them, communicate them, use them, love them. But again, if they aren't tied to business goals, if they are not those 5 items that we mentioned from the Lean Analytics book, are they comparable? Are they understandable? Are they a rate or ratio? And then do they have action? If you don't have those built into your dashboard, if you don't have those 4 qualities built in your dashboard, you'll have some kind of issue and some kind of problems. All right, so I went through that rather quickly. Jeremy?
Yeah, so we have a question that just came in from Lonnie. Lonnie, you want to go ahead?
Yeah, thanks. So I'm wondering how to set up a system to basically get in the habit of measurement, specifically for measuring product, like how often, do you have any tactical advice for that?
Sure. It's a great question. Thank you, Lonnie. Tactically, my advice would be, you will probably want to look at things daily, and you'll probably want to communicate things out weekly. And so that's at least but you'll want daily for your own sake. And if someone comes to you, again, I communicate all of mine out weekly to the entire organization that I'm a part of, right? So we are a startup with 50 people. Every Monday morning, I tell people exactly how the product is doing, certain event triggers, how many people are doing certain things over this period of time, and then kind of whatever else, I have a other list of sundry metrics that I will throw out there. So does that answer the question? I mean, so tactically, that's the time frame. And then coming up with that list, I go through the same process that I went before. Realistically, I'm looking for engaged users. I'm looking for users who are getting into the product in certain ways. And I have a certain amount of customer count that I'm looking at. So I'm doing it as a percentage of that customer count. So how many of my customers are engaged every week? Are they new customers or different customers? Is there something I can say about their cohort in that kind of weekly time frame so that when I'm reporting back to the business, they understand, okay, great. Things haven't changed, or they've changed and things are going up, or things are going down, or new features, especially when new features are being launched, I will talk about, who's using them, how are they used, and kind of list all of that out. Does that help? Is there anything else that I can help you with there, or any other questions about that?
Yeah, I'm just wondering. I mean, that helps a lot, the daily and weekly. I'm wondering, like, how much time that's going to take.
The setup is painful, but if you need to automate it as much as possible, right? So I've used a couple of different analytics packages. Right now, I'm actually just using Google Analytics again with custom dimensions, and the custom dimensions are what actually help me understand things at like a customer level versus a user level. And then I have to set up things like regexes for like what pages they're on. And so whenever a new feature comes out, I have to actually make sure that I have that also programmed in. So I think there's another point of this, and I'm glad you brought this up, which is, and I was just having this conversation with someone else before this call. What you really need to do is have the discipline on both your side from wanting the metrics and then demanding the metrics from the dev side, right? So sometimes if it's not built into the dev portion to say, make sure you have the event tag logged in every new feature, you aren't going to get that feedback that you need. And ideally, if you have the event tag log, say if you're using Google Analytics Plain or some other analytics package, or if you're using something like segment.com to kind of say just make, as kind of just the global event tracking item, once you have that start rolling in, you should be able to automate it at a fairly quick rate. And then it's just a matter of tweaking it with every single release. Like what is it that I want to get out of this release? And if you're doing something like a 2 or 3 week release cycle, you just tweak it on that. If you have longer release cycles, you can obviously, spend a little bit more time on it.
Excellent, excellent. So that's all the questions we have today. It was light on the questions, but the information was really great. Thank you to Bennett Morrison, our speaker, head of product at Security Scorecard, for today's discussion of measuring product and development. And as always, the presentation everyone just saw will be available on our SlideShare channel. And a big thank you from me, Jeremy Horn, the product guy, and everyone else who joined us today on the Product Mentor. And also don't forget, if you're interested in being a product mentor, like today's speaker, Bennett, to product people of all sorts all around the world, please go and sign up at theproductmentor.com. Session 5 starts on May 1st, so we can definitely use a lot more mentors. And also, if you're looking to fill a new product job with a great product person, visit our very own free-for-all job board at theproductjobs.com. Thanks. Bye.